Hello and welcome to this video. In this video we are going to be discussing the dangers of radioactivity. So now in the previous video we looked at individual uses for each of these types of radiation. Now we have to make sure that we also are familiar with the dangers that come with each of these types of radiation and some ways that we can limit our exposure to those types of radiation. So let's first start by looking at alpha radiation. Now alpha radiation, the two properties that we need to be familiar with that we're going to talk about today is the fact that alpha radiation is very highly ionizing, but also the fact that alpha radiation can be stopped by paper. Okay, so it's highly ionizing and stopped by paper. Now what that means for us as a danger for humans, it means if it's outside of the body, it doesn't really have any immediate danger. Okay, so if it can be stopped by paper, it definitely can't penetrate human skin. So this means that when outside of the body, it can have little to no effect. Okay, so it's relatively safe. Okay, now this isn't to say that it's completely safe to go and take a bath in something that's alpha emitting, but what it does mean is if we stand at least a few meters away and we're like clothed or something like that, if we're wearing some sort of clothing that stops it from getting to our skin, then it definitely can't reach our skin. It can't ionize any of the cells on the surface of our skin. The problem then becomes what happens if somehow it gets injected or ingested into the body. But when inside the body, it can have very big problems. Okay, so when inside the body, this leads to something called alpha poisoning. Now, alpha poisoning is a way of causing the actual cells of a human to not only be killed, but also sometimes just mutated, so that the proteins that these cells form will be of different genes. And this is due to the highly ionizing property of alpha radiation. What's actually happening here, we don't have to know too much detail about the biology behind this, but what we do have to know is that when alpha decay or when alpha radiation is inside the body, it will continually ionize atoms that make up your body's proteins, DNA, cells, and by doing that, it will begin to basically destroy your cells from the inside. So alpha radiation can ionize your body's atoms, and this can lead to mutations. It can lead to cell death, and even eventually end up with the person themselves dying. It's poisoning after all. What it is doing is destroying the body from the inside, which means that these uses of alpha radiation definitely cannot be medical uses. We cannot ever have alpha particles entering the human body, because that is extremely dangerous and can cause people to actually die from this. Okay, that's why all of the use of alpha radiation will be outside of the field of medicine. This is why we looked at the example of fire alarms. Now for beta radiation, we have the same kind of danger. For beta radiation, the same danger is that if it's outside of the body, again, it's not too much of an issue. It could be stopped by thin aluminium. It can be stopped by human skin. The only kind of increment of danger here is that it can also be inside the body. When inside the body, this is only moderately ionizing. Okay, so moderately ionizing. And all this means is that it can be ingested inside the body, but it will still ionize those cells, but not to the same extent. So beta will also ionize atoms in the body, but not as harshly or as rapidly as alpha radiation will. Harshly or rapidly as alpha radiation. And for this reason, while it is still dangerous and it's not obviously recommended, we can use beta radiation in medical procedures. And in fact, we do use them in medical procedures. As we briefly mentioned in the previous video, PET scans or positron emission tomography, this is a use that uses both beta radiation and gamma radiation. So why can then we say that even though it will ionize and kill the cells in your body, why is it not completely disregarded as being inside the human body? Well, the main thing here is that with this type of radiation, the benefits outweigh the risks. The benefits outweigh the risks. It means that we can choose the correct half-life or the correct activity for a radioactive source that should be ingested or injected into the body, such that we will provide the smallest exposure time of radiation as possible. Okay, so we choose the half-life or the activity of a source to be, or actually to limit the exposure time of a patient. Okay, so usually we have a half-life that's maybe a few hours. This then means that maybe after one day, all of the radioactive particles that are in the system will have been passed through naturally. But this then means that we get enormous benefits out of this. For example, one of the benefits of a PET scan is that we can correctly pinpoint the location of a cancer or a tumor and then be able to destroy it or remove it or whatever needs to be done from that point. But by having a small dosage of radiation, which in effect is not completely harmful, but can also have some benefit, we can then cure someone or treat someone of cancer. Which therefore means that the benefits that we can get from this outweigh the risks, and the risks being that we mutate a few cells or maybe kill some cells. The final type of radiation that we have to look at is gamma radiation. And gamma radiation, the main kind of danger of it is highly penetrating, okay, and also weakly ionizing. But because it has such a small wavelength, because of its high energy, or due to its high energy, it can pass through very small gaps, which means that it can actually enter cells and it causes single electrons in the DNA of a molecule to be shifted, and by doing that you change the whole genetic makeup of this cell, and it causes them to mutate and die. So this can kill cells. Now, we said that was a use in a previous in the previous video. We can use it to kill cancer cells, we can use it to kill bacteria cells and sterilize medical equipment, but also if we're firing that at a human body, the gamma rays don't know what is a healthy cell, what's a cancer cell. It's all the same to them. Okay, so what they will do is they also have the probability of killing healthy cells. So they can kill healthy cells or cancerous cells. The problem we have then is sometimes by exposing someone to gamma radiation, it can also cause mutations, and instead of treating cancer, this can actually then cause cancer. So there is a risk here that if we were to expose this patient to radiation for too long, it would start to maybe even have the chance of producing even more cancer cells while killing the other ones. And this is, again, another risk. The way we can reduce these risks or reduce the effect of this danger is to first correctly identify the exact position of those cancer cells or tumor cells, so that we can perfectly aim the gamma rays just towards those cells. Now that also means that we have to limit the exposure time that we have. This is why when people undergo things like chemotherapy, it's never just one session where they get blitzed with gamma radiation to try and kill these cells. It will be a repeating treatment that will slowly begin to cast them away, because you need the exposure time to be as minimal as possible. Okay, so the way we can kind of get around this is to minimize the exposure time of the patient. Now, along with this, we can also say something we haven't looked at quite yet, is the reason that this is radiation is because it's an electromagnetic wave. It holds some amount of energy. It's only categorized as gamma because that's usually the frequency or the energy of the wave that gets emitted by the nucleus. But if it's exactly the same form and I just reduce the energy of it, I'll get to an X-ray. If I reduce it further, I'll get ultraviolet, visible light. Everything on the electromagnetic spectrum could also count as radiation. It's electromagnetic radiation. And when we think about it like that, we have nurses and doctors and radiologists and people like this who are in a hospital for 8 hours at a time, maybe sometimes longer, who are constantly being exposed to these X-rays, these beta sources, the gamma rays even. And how do we keep them safe? How do they know? How do they limit their exposure time if they're there constantly? Or how do they monitor their exposure time? And the way we do that is we have something called a film badge. And everyone in the kind of radiology department will be assigned their own lab coat with a film badge. Now, the use of a film badge is it monitors the amount of radiation that it comes into contact with. So it monitors the amount of radiation it absorbs. And it then changes color depending on the level of radiation it's absorbed. If it then gets to a dangerous level, the film badge will change to a specific color that then notifies the person who is wearing that they need to then decrease their exposure time. They've been there for too long. So it changes color and signifies dangerous levels of radiation. Okay, and this is a common technique that will be used in basically every hospital, in every radiology department. They will also undergo procedures such as increasing the distance that they have from the device. So if you've ever had an X-ray, you'll know that the person who is performing the X-ray, the doctor or the radiologist, will always step behind a screen, and that screen is there to basically block most of the X-ray radiation from coming through, because again, they're there for many, many hours in the day. If they were to just stand next to it and then absorb all of that radiation, that would be very dangerous for them. So now we have a rough idea of some of these dangers and also a few ideas of how to decrease the dangers. The biggest one being just don't get near anything with radiation. If you can avoid that, stay as far away as you possibly can. From here then, we know uses, we know dangers and how to reduce them. And thank you for watching.